All right, my friends, Jared Dukes at your service. Appreciate everybody being here today. Just hit the buttons, make everything work. We have a lot to talk about today, so we're going to jump right into it. Hello to everyone on the X platform. Thank you for joining. Obviously on YouTube and on Twitch. Looks like everything is working the way it should work. If you have any comments or if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to drop it in the chat that's on your screen. Also, I just put a link in the chat. If you'd like to join via video or if you'd like to call in a question, kind of like phone a friend type thing, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I will go through the chat periodically and answer any questions that you may have. All right, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. What a busy news day, if not news week already, as far as all the different events that's happening, especially in Trump world, right? Well, tonight, folks, we're going to be talking all about this Joe Biden story. I got a few other things I want to talk about, and there's some good news that I'll be talking about later on in tonight's broadcast. But friends, I have been talking about this on the channel now for at least a year and a half, and that is that former president, feels good to say, former President Joe Biden definitely had some serious issues. And listen, I think we're in the middle right now of having nothing short of one of the biggest in American history cover-up stories. I really hope that President Trump and the people working for him do a thorough and complete investigation into this Joe Biden story that seems like it just keeps getting more and more deep, more and more involved. There's just more layers to this onion, so to speak, as we keep peeling it back. Former President Joe Biden, this is the man that at one time had the nuclear codes. Imagine this, flying around on Air Force One, making executive decisions, steering the so-called, well, we'll just call it the ship of state. Clearly, it's getting worse. He has just been diagnosed with a very aggressive and what they call a metastatic, aka cancer of the prostate cancer. And I don't believe for a second that this is a new diagnosis, which of course is the story they're trying to sell us. Remember, I'm the same guy that a year and a half ago, if not more, I've been talking about, hey, what is wrong with President Joe Biden? Well, I think we have some answers, and it's not necessarily what we thought it was. Originally, we were talking about something along the sides of what's called Lewy body dementia, because clearly he acted like he has some type of dementia, some kind of cognitive problem, some kind of advanced disease issue involving his ability to govern, involving his ability to think, involving everything in his day-to-day life. Well, it turns out, at least as far as I'm concerned, by piecing all the evidence together, that former President Joe Biden has been receiving, probably still is receiving, treatment for cancer while serving as president of the United States. Can you imagine that? Chemotherapy, hormone replacement therapy, and possible additional surgeries, all while putting on an act along with the people that were enabling him, aka Dr. Jill Biden. I say that as a insulting joke because it is. I don't believe anybody should be called doctor, at least be referred to as doctor day to day, unless you have delivered children or you're actually engaging in what we consider work of a doctor. But I digress. And now, of course, the mainstream media is scrambling. They're coming out with books. They're playing catch up. They're trying to cash in on this story by acting like they've had let's just call it a come to Jesus moment. Well, guess what? This is not news. This is nonsense. This is profiteering. This is just a continuation of what I consider the destruction of the so-called legacy media. You cannot trust these legacy media types anymore. I think it's just really, really straightforward. Now, what I'm talking about will and does, in my opinion, explain so much of the confusion, the slurred words, the forgetfulness, the bizarre behavior, his disappearing acts, period. I mean, I got a whole list of them that I'm going to go through with you here in just a second, kind of a timeline of what's been going on for former President Joe Biden. And even now, you have the Democrats, what I call circling the wagon. Well, again, I believe we are witnessing what is going to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cover-up in American history. Can you imagine if current President Donald Trump was doing something similar, was hiding some kind of cancer diagnosis, the media would be all over this. And I mean, they would be on this in the most vicious and serious manner, period. Think about this. Every time Donald Trump allegedly slurs a word or says something, I don't know, just a little bit offhand, whatever, even as a joke, they are always pouncing on him saying, hey, guess what? Donald Trump has some type of issue. He's no longer fit to serve. I heard something about that just the other day, some kind of comment, some kind of joke he made in one of his recent speeches. Clearly, there is a double standard. And I want to be really clear about this too. As Americans, when it comes to the President of the United States, we have a right to know. We have a right to know exactly whether or not our commander-in-chief is mentally or physically compromised. It isn't about politics in my mind, my friends. It's all about national security. And the fact that this was hidden, imagine the doctors, the staff, the media insiders, all of these people that helped bury this story. It's, in my mind, not just unethical, it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of the America populace. It's, these people were elected, they were hired, they were put there to serve you and to serve me and to take care of our great country. And clearly, they have failed at this immensely. It's just something that should not be tolerated in the United States of America. And we're about to take a look at it in a minute, my friends. This is not the first time in American history that there's been some kind of condition hidden as far as the President of the United States go. But I would argue this has been such a more serious situation that's happened. I mean, think about this. You had former President Biden. It feels good to say former President Joe Biden. Look what he did in Afghanistan. Look what he did giving away military bases right in the backyard of China. All that free equipment that he gave away. The Taliban never had night vision equipment. They never had night vision goggles. Well, guess what? They have it now. All of that equipment we supposedly destroyed, surprise, surprise, a lot of it is up and running, unfortunately. And again, that huge military base right in the back door, so to speak, of China was given up to the Taliban. Look at all the people that were killed, 13 men and women officers, people in uniform killed at that airport as they were continuing this so-called, end to the war, this evacuation, whatever you want to call it. I call it a surrender. And as it turns out, President Biden was warned. He was cautioned by his own general, sir, do not do this. And of course, in multiple interviews, President Biden has stated, hey, I was never told that. And then the last interview I saw pertaining to former President Biden, he said something to the effect of, to the best of my memory, and of course, we know how his memory is. He was not warned not to evacuate and leave that military base in Afghanistan. It's really unconscionable that this has happened. And my friends, I'll just say this as we go through this. This should not be allowed to ever happen again, period. Just the way that I see it. So, all right, I see everybody's filing in already. Thanks for being here. American Nana, hello. Thank you for being here. My friend Zach, it's good to have you back with us. I know you've been busy. Thank you for being here, Zach. I have some comments that you left, and I will respond to them just as soon as I can. But thanks for being here, Zach. It's always good to have you in the chat. My friend Sapphire, thank you for being here as always. All right, looks like we are ready to move on. So let's take a look at this little form I made for us here. I want to just talk about 2 or 3 points pertaining to this nonsense that's going on and exactly what is coming to light right now. And by the way, I know many of you, Zach, American Nana, Sapphire, y'all have been with me a long time. You know, we have talked about on this very channel exactly the fact that something's wrong with Joe Biden. Well, guess what? We know there was something wrong, and the media is finally admitting it. And I think the takeaway here as we go through this, I'm of the opinion now that it's not necessarily that he had dementia, even Lewy body dementia. He may very well have that or the beginnings of it. I think what has happened, and here's the key takeaway today, what I think you're going to hear reported on more and more from here on out is the behavior we have seen exhibited by former President Joe Biden was a result of the treatments he's been receiving as a result of having this cancer diagnosis. Again, I don't have anything to officially, stick a thumbtack in and say, hey, here is the evidence for that. I'm just kind of putting this whole picture together. So let's continue with this here. Is there a law requiring a president to disclose his health issues? Well, guess what? The answer is no. There is no federal law, no constitutional requirement, or any kind of binding regulation that forces a sitting president to disclose their medical conditions. It doesn't matter if they are mentally unfit or physically unfit. They are not required by law to disclose this. The only thing we have that you may be aware of is the 25th Amendment that was passed back in 1967. It's still, though, this amendment does not require health disclosures. It only provides for the following. What we call a voluntary transfer of power. We have seen that several times in American history. Matter of fact, it's somewhat routine. A president may have to go under some type of procedure, and he's technically put out with medication for a very short time frame. So the quote-unquote acting president is generally the vice president in the president's absence. So that's pretty well common sense. Now, it will require his cabinet to vote in order to declare. It says involuntary removal if a VP or majority of the cabinet declare the president unfit. That is Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. Now, we have not seen the 25th Amendment enacted yet as far as removing a president. And just as a side note, it is generally considered the worst written amendment in the entire Constitution, which is kind of concerning because I've heard other scholars talk about the fact that if a president, for whatever reason, thinks that there may be a vote where he might be removed, and it's up to the cabinet members, all the president has to do is simply, hey, guess what? You guys are fired. Get out of here. And then there's no cabinet to remove the president. So clearly, the 25th Amendment does have some issues that need clarifying. Of course, in today's political climate, I can all but assure you there is no way that they would be able to pass anything through all 50 states or the 3/4 majority that would be required to clarify or to pass another amendment on anything. So annual physicals. It's tradition, not law. You know how we occasionally see some report. I know President Trump just has some type of physical or mental evaluation, and he released his numbers. Matter of fact, with the exception of Joe Biden, I believe it was George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and President Trump, they released their numbers pertaining to their PSA reading. And thankfully, President Trump's was very low, especially compared to Obama and George W. Bush. So thankfully, he seems to be very fit and healthy. But again, there is no requirement on annual physicals. There is historical precedent, as I talked about a minute ago, as far as, hey, what in American history has happened where we've had something similar happen that what we just went through with Joe Biden? And again, nothing that's an exact match, but think about this. FDR hid the extent of his paralysis, and he was suffering with congestive heart failure. And of course, most of us know that JFK had Addison's disease and never disclosed that to the public. And finally, Woodrow Wilson had a massive stroke and was effectively incapacitated for the final 18 months of his term. And his wife was running the show. And of course, that's probably pretty close to what we just went through with President Biden, right? So scary. There is zero legal requirements for mental health screenings or disclosure. In fact, if a president was developing dementia, or let's just call it a neurodegenerative disorder, it would be entirely up to the president to bring that forward to the American public. It just doesn't seem right. I'm sure you guys would agree with that. Do you guys think that that's a problem? I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat in office or an independent. I think that when it comes to the commander-in-chief, we need to know what type of health they are in. I don't really care if they're suffering some type of erectile dysfunction necessarily, but I do care if they are mentally unfit. I do care if they have congestive heart failure. I do care if they have prostate cancer, if they have a terminal cancer diagnosis. This is information that we all need to know. And by extension, I would say that I mean, this is just my opinion. I would say that any candidate that wants to run for president of the United States should be required to turn over some type of disclosure. So I see some comments popping up here. Let me see if anybody's got any questions. Let's see. Alrighty, I read Sapphire. I read an article this afternoon. It said Biden had a yeah, I heard that too. He hadn't had a PSA test since 2014. And folks, I tell you straight up, I don't believe that is truthful. I'm sure you don't either. There's no way. And listen, I know that there is a volume of literature out there that basically says, hey, a president, or I should say anybody over the age, I believe it's 70 years of age, is not necessarily recommended for them to take a PSA test, simply because as a male gets older, they generally are going to have some type of cancer cells in their prostate. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they're dying of some type of prostate condition or prostate cancer. Having said that, it just offends my sensitivities, to be honest with you, that somebody that's president of the United States would not have a PSA test, that his doctor would not recommend that. You know what I hope they do is they have a very thorough and public investigation into all of these issues here, and bring these doctors, bring the people that were around former President Biden, and bring them in and ask them questions under oath. Did you do this for the president? Did you give a PSA test to the president? If so, what did it read? I mean, we need to get an investigation started, and we need to figure out what happened in relation to this whole situation. It's intolerable. It cannot be allowed to continue. That's just the way that I see it. Zach, yes, I probably am in fast mode tonight, but I appreciate you being here just the same, and I'll try to talk slower. If you need me to repeat something, just ask. I'm happy to answer whatever question you might have. And see, my friend Mark saying, Sapphire, also his doctor, Kevin O'Connor, was hired by jail. I wouldn't be surprised. You know, his wife was definitely enabling a bunch of this nonsense. No drinking and driving, yet you could be brain dead and still have a new code. Yeah, it is ridiculous and unconscionable, but that's the way it seems to be. Yeah, which means he could have been diagnosed then, according to Dr. Drew. Yeah, it takes a long time. That's my understanding too, for prostate cancer to actually be at the stage that former President Joe Biden has right now. So go figure. It's something's wrong. Someone's lying. Someone's not telling us the truth, ladies and gentlemen. That's just the way I see it. Someone's been running the country. Now, listen, I agree that one president does not literally run the whole country. They have surrogates. They have other people that they hire or they charge to administer certain things. And you know, you kind of have a pyramid set up, if you will, as far as making sure that the country is ran. But clearly, President Biden was in no shape, and he was not able to make the important decisions that needed to be made. And we need to find out who made these decisions, because someone made these decisions. Someone signed the pardons. Someone did all the stuff that Joe Biden did, letting in 10, 12 million illegals, opening up the borders, giving away that air base, doing all the nonsense that he did. Something is seriously, seriously wrong. And we need to get to the bottom of it. I guess that's the bottom line. Now, here's the meat of what I've been talking about here. I was thinking to myself, can prostate cancer cause cognitive or mental decline? And guess what? Surprisingly, it generally does not. But here's the takeaway. The treatments that they generally have, the recommended, the standard treatments, when you have the kind of prostate cancer that unfortunately former President Joe Biden has, can cause these type of effects, specifically what they call hormone therapy, ADT, known cognitive impact. So it does have impact, according to the experts here. There's something, the ADT, it's adrenal deprivation therapy, is a cornerstone treatment for advanced prostate cancer. It significantly lowers testosterone, and long-term use has been linked to cognitive side effects, including, tell me who this sounds like, right? Brain fog, memory issues, fatigue, depression, or mood swings. Interesting, right? These symptoms can mimic early dementia-like conditions, but they're often reversible or manageable depending on treatment. Clearly, something has been wrong with Joe Biden. And, that in my mind, that kind of makes a lot of sense. I was thinking, could it be something where cancer went to the brain? It's rare, but possible. So we'll just kind of excuse that. It probably not the situation President Biden was suffering from. But the more likely explanation, as far as I'm concerned, is going to be a combination of the prostate cancer treatments along with what we've been talking about over the last year and a half: Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, some type of Alzheimer's, and just normal age-related impairment, cognitive impairment of some type. So the verdict, ladies and gentlemen: prostate cancer, even aggressive and late stage, does not usually cause the symptoms we see in Biden. However, the treatments that they generally recommend and perform can and normally does produce the effects that we have seen with former President Joe Biden. Isn't that interesting? I called this many months ago. And of course, they told us what? It was misinformation, disinformation. We were lying. You know what, folks? They've been gaslighting each and every one of us for quite some time now. Gaslighting each and every one of us, telling us, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe what you can see right in front of you. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Just absolute insanity. Now, let's just take a quick trip down memory lane, just starting June 2023. This is just observations about President Biden. He has that popular and infamous Air Force Academy fall. President Biden tripped and fell during his U.S. Air Force Academy graduation ceremony. We all remember him falling down or falling on those stairs. June 2023, the same month, he gave a remark that says, "God save the Queen." That was at a gun control event in Connecticut. Biden concluded his speech saying, "God save the Queen, man." Months after Queen Elizabeth II died. Interesting, right? September 2023, Vietnam press conference. During a press conference in Vietnam, Biden appeared to be disoriented, saying, "I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed," before his press secretary abruptly ended the session. October 23, special counsel interview. Audio from Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur. We all know Robert Hur, the AKA the Hur report, received frequent memory lapses and difficulty staying on topic, including forgetting the date of his son's death. And of course, now some of those audio recordings has slowly been coming to see the light of day. And I don't know if you've heard those recordings or not, but trust me, it definitely reinforces what we already know. Remember, this Robert Hur is the same prosecutor that said, in all likelihood, Biden is guilty, and he would normally charge him with mishandling records. Because unlike President Trump at that time, Biden was not president of the United States, yet he had all these classified records in his garage, in his Corvette, whatever, all over the place, right? Well, this was the report where Robert Hur said that Biden appeared to be basically a well-meaning old man with serious memory issues. Translation: he cannot put him on trial because he's basically not able to be culpable for decisions, for deeds that he's done. In other words, he's president of the United States, yet he is not able mentally to stand trial. Isn't that something? And yet you had Jake Tapper and all these idiots that are coming forward now with these books telling each and every one of us, we can't believe our lying eyes, and we surely cannot believe Robert Hur and his report. Amazing. And June 2024, the presidential debate performance. Biden's performance during the debate against Donald Trump was widely criticized for his confused and disoriented demeanor. We all saw that debate, if you will, that debacle, which was basically the end of President Biden's attempt to return to the presidency for a second term. July 2024, NATO summit gaffe. This is where in a NATO summit, Biden mistakenly introduced I remember this, the Ukrainian president Zelensky as President Putin. That was wonderful, right? July 2024, you had George Clooney's op-ed that came out. July 2024, COVID-19 diagnosed. Biden tested positive for COVID-19, and images of him looking frail while exiting Air Force One fueled further speculation about his health. July 2024, Biden says, "Hey, I am going to go ahead and withdraw from running for president of the United States." May 2025, prostate cancer diagnosis, which is obviously now. So it's just like it never ends with Biden. And that was just me going back just a year and a half. I mean, it just, it's remarkable that all this is finally coming out now. And ladies and gentlemen, it's only by the grace of God that Biden dropped out and that Kamala Harris was not elected president of the United States. Don't get me wrong, Donald Trump had a massive, and in my mind, a decisive victory, especially when you look at the Electoral College. But don't kid yourself. The vote, in my estimation, was way, way too close. The vote totals were what I would call too close for comfort. It is remarkable that President Trump was able to actually win the presidency. Not only did he win the presidency, he won not just the Electoral College, but the popular vote. And that is a remarkable accomplishment for a Republican in and of itself. And he did that while he had effectively the entire legacy media, the entire media period, always hammering him and coming out against him. It was like it was never ending. So in my mind, good job. Good job for President Trump. I think it was pretty decisive, his victory, but that's just my take on it. I got a video we're going to take a peek at next. Let me make sure that I didn't miss anything important. Let's see. Dr. Drew explained the autopin thing. Yeah, Benny had a good program on some of this. I think I did see some of that. And American Nana says, I have the person who signed the pardons, so it's been reported. Well, that's all going to come out in the investigation, and I agree that there definitely needs to be investigations. All right, Zach says, doesn't gaslighting require the victim getting confused or questioning his or her own judgment? If that doesn't happen, attempted gaslighting. I like that. That sounds good, Zach. Yeah, see, Sapphire says, Dr. Drew, prostate cancer board side effects treatment are, okay, yeah, Parkinsonism. I did not find that term when I was researching it, but it doesn't matter what you call it. I call it a clue. I call it clearly just more evidence of what's been going on. And it just seems to me that it's just kind of all coming full circle, if you will. So I think, I don't know. I think it's clear that President Biden, at least in my mind, has been treated for prostate cancer. And that's one of the main reasons we've been seeing all this behavior that we've been seeing. And remember, there is a video clip going around, and no one really thought anything about it last year. But when Biden did drop out of the election, they were reading different comments. And I believe it was his own brother, President Biden's brother at the time, said something to the effect of, hey, he did the right thing. And he made a comment that says, whatever time he has left, I hope he enjoys the rest of his life, or something to that effect. I don't know. When you look back through the prism of time, knowing what we know now, it's very clear, very obvious, at least in my mind, as to what has been transpiring. So if you agree with me on that, let me know. I mean, I would say it's possible he has not been treated for cancer, but I just don't buy it. I just don't believe it. I just don't buy it. I don't believe that, on the eve of all these books coming out talking about President Joe Biden and his deterioration, that the day before all this cancer diagnosis stuff just happened to come out. I don't believe it, and I'm sure most of you guys don't believe it either. I'm not a big conspiracy buff myself. So, and Zach agrees with me too. Thanks, Zach. I think it's pretty obvious. Something is amiss, right? Let's take a peek at this right here, and we'll talk about it.
Just days after former President Biden announced he has an aggressive form of prostate cancer, a new book out today blasts Biden aides and people in the White House at that time for allegedly hiding his declining health from the public while he was in office. Original Sin by journalists Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson delves into firsthand accounts, many anonymous, from Biden's time in office. Earlier on CBS Mornings, Tapper directly addressed who he believes is to blame for what he describes as a cover-up.
I think the main people complicit in hiding the non-functioning Biden were President Biden, First Lady.
I don't know about you guys. It makes my ears bleed having to listen to Jake Tapper. Obviously, he's in it for the money, trying to make money. And he's apparently having a AKA a Maricopa event of some sort, saying, hey, you know, I was wrong, but forgive me. But it's real obvious now. This guy was one of the biggest talking heads on TV, gaslighting each and every one of us almost every day.
Biden, Hunter Biden. And then his immediate circle of aides that other people in the White House called the Politburo, Mike Donnellan, Steve Ricchetti, and some others. They were the ones who saw President Biden every day, up close and personal, and whether they were lying to themselves and everybody else or just everybody else.
A Biden spokesperson released a statement today saying, quote, there is nothing in this book that shows Joe Biden failed to do his job, as the authors have alleged, nor did they prove their allegation that there was a cover-up or conspiracy. Nowhere did they show that our national security was threatened or where the president wasn't otherwise engaged in the important matters of the presidency. In fact, Joe Biden was an effective president who led our country with empathy and skill. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro is in Wilmington, Delaware, where the former president is. Aaron, what specific moments are detailed in the book?
Lindsay, in addition to some of the moments where the White House looked to accompany or, as they write, cover up the president's health and his age, such as scripting cabinet meetings, even though there were no cameras present, or adjusting what times he would do public events in the day. You also saw several specific instances of Democratic members of Congress interacting with Biden, sharing their concerns privately, and maybe not sharing it at all publicly or waiting for a while. For instance, Congressman Mike Quigley from Illinois accompanied President Biden on a trip before he announced his reelection in 2023. They went to Ireland, and Quigley described many moments where the president seemed to have a shot of adrenaline and moments where he was completely deflated. And he said it reminded him of his own dad, who had passed away due to Parkinson's.
And one other thing I'll say about that, this specific video clip, in my mind, and we talked about this sometime last year too, I think that they were giving him some type of medication before he would go on the air, at least most of the time. If you remember, it was last year with the State of the Union. I cover that also. I remember how he was very forceful, very feisty. As a matter of fact, I thought he did relatively a decent job. Not that I agreed with the politics at all, but he was definitely more feisty, and he was, kind of taking his case to the American public the way we would expect a normal functioning politician to do so. And then you'd have the next day or another day where Biden just seemed like he just wasn't there. So at that time, I was thinking they have to be giving him some medication. I think that's kind of what that reporter there is halfway alluding to in relation to Biden. So listen, I think that there's going to be a lot more to fall on this, so to speak, a lot more coming out. This by no means, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this particular story. It is simply going to balloon from here. I have no doubt in my mind about that. There's going to be an investigation of this if it hasn't started already. Clearly there is. And you know what? You have to hand it to President Trump being sort of kind towards former President Biden and his family, because if I had an individual that came after me the way Biden came after me and had his cronies come after me and try to put me in jail, I would not be very kind about it, if you know what I'm saying. Matter of fact, I'd be very angry and very nasty about it. Of course, I don't want to see anybody suffering with cancer or suffering, period. But at the same time, you have to hand it to President Trump. He's being, in my mind, very graceful towards former President Biden and his family at this time, because they definitely did not reciprocate the same kind of formalities and niceties, if you will, towards Donald Trump. And matter of fact, they went after his kids, they went after his businesses, and they are still doing that to a large degree, aka I give you the soon-to-be incarcerated New York Attorney General Letitia James. And I'll have much more to talk about concerning her in the days to come this week. So it's we'll see exactly how that how that plans out. And yeah, American Nana said he probably got a good dose of vitamin B12. He probably did, if not something even stronger. I would not be surprised about that either way. So we'll see how that pans out. I do want to share with y'all some good news today too. Let me switch over and share my screen with y'all here. Couple stories that I've been following that I think you guys are going to be happy to share with me tonight. First, good piece of news. This is reported by courthousenews.com. We all know and love former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Okay, well, you know, the state of Arizona, they unfortunately have been controlled recently anyways by a lot of Democrats. And we all know what these Democrats have been doing to President Trump and other Republicans that were basically working with President Trump. Well, good news today. Prosecutors, as you see here with this story, prosecutors fumble, which I love to see. The prosecutors fumble forces a reboot in Arizona's fake elector case. So I'm going to read just the beginning of this right here, but this is obviously a picture of Rudy Giuliani back in 2024 leaving a courthouse. But here's the takeaway from Phoenix, Arizona. After 2 years of litigation, state prosecutors accusing Arizona Republicans of interfering with the 2020 presidential election will have to start from scratch. Amen. The group of politicians and party leaders, mostly allies of President Donald Trump, said prosecutors failed to present to a grand jury a century-old law. Even if it's century-old, it's still the law, right? A century-old law. It claims, excuses, its decision to send a slate of Republican electoral votes to Congress despite Joe Biden beating the Republican nominee. Maricopa County Judge Sam Myers agreed, sending the case back to a new grand jury to decide again whether the state can move forward with charges. The takeaway from this is when they got this indictment against Giuliani and these other alleged co-conspirators, they did not do it properly. They basically held back some other laws that the grand jury should have considered before indicting Rudy Giuliani and the other alleged co-conspirators in the so-called fake electors case. Translation, it's been thrown out of court. The case has been thrown out of court. You don't hear a lot of reporting about it, but this is one of the many cases that I do follow. Now, what do I think is going to happen as a result of that? I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to go on the record and say nothing's going to happen. They're going to drop the case. It's over. It's dead. Just my opinion. If it does go forward, they're going to blame it on a grand jury. In other words, they present it to a grand jury, they give them the new information, and the grand jury refuses to return what's called a true bill, aka they will blame the grand jury, say, nope, the grand jury refused to indict, so we cannot go forward with the case. Just my prediction. We'll see exactly what happens. But clearly, and obviously, that is very good news for a lot of people, especially Rudy Giuliani and some of the other alleged co-conspirators in this particular case. So, anyway, I'm glad to see that happened, which is some good news. Now, here is some more good news. We are all familiar with the January 6th nonsense and the persecution of all the patriots that were in Washington D.C. that day. Now, listen, don't get me wrong. There were some people there that got out of hand, no doubt about it. At the same time, I truly can tell you I wasn't necessarily happy with everything Donald Trump did on that day, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But when you look at everything in its entirety, clearly the liberal Democrats, if you would, these woke Democrats, did everything they could to shove this down our throats for the last 4 years and used it as an excuse to try to keep us from voting for the next president, Donald Trump, for his second term. I mean, they basically turned this case, in my estimation, into nothing more than what I would call a election interference case. Period. It's really just that simple. And we all remember the patriot Ashley Babbitt that was killed by that nutty, crazy cop. I think his name was Michael. I think I have the article with him in it. There's that guy's mugshot right there. I can't stand that guy. Looking at him, yes, Lieutenant Michael Byrd. What a disgrace. At any rate, the family, the estate, if you will, of Ashley Babbitt, she was one that was shot trying to grow through that plate glass window inside the Capitol. That idiot that I just showed you shot her dead. She was unarmed. She simply was crawling through the broken glass of an interior door, and this dork shot her dead, saying, "I saved countless lives." And of course, that just really chats me every time I see that. But if there's any justice in this situation, number one, I would love to see that Michael Byrd prosecuted for murder. He had no reason to shoot her, in my estimation, period, full stop. He should be charged. Unfortunately, President Biden, I believe, gave him some type of medal. I don't think it was the Medal of Freedom, but gave him some type of award, some type of recognition. I hope that President Trump was able to reverse that and to basically have an investigation into exactly what happened. But for now, the takeaway is Donald Trump, the Trump administration, agrees to pay nearly $5 million to settle the suit over Ashley Babbitt shooting in the Capitol. This was in the Komu.com. I think it's a Hawaiian or at least a West Coast newspaper.com. It says the Trump administration has agreed to pay just under $5 million to settle a wrongful death lawsuit that Ashley Babbitt's family filed over her shooting by an officer. We know what kind of officer this guy was, right? During the U.S. Capitol riot, according to a person with knowledge of the settlement. The person insinuated on anonymity to discuss the Associated Press terms of the settlement that have not yet been made public. The settlement would resolve a $30 million federal lawsuit that the Babbitt estate filed last year in Washington, D.C. On January 6, 2021, a Capitol police officer shot Babbitt as she tried to climb through a broken window of a barricaded door leading to the speaker's lobby. It's funny how these news people try to embellish this and make it sound more sinister than what it is. But again, I still think that is good news for their family. What a piece of, what this guy is. It's really, really insulting. And I have some more stories, like I said, coming out later the week pertaining to sweet Letitia James. Just gotta love her, right? You gotta love her. She's about to get paid back handsomely with what, in my opinion, she so richly deserves, right? Okay. All right, here we go. Let me check and make sure that I caught all of our questions. So make sure I don't miss anything. If I missed anybody, I do apologize. So we'll see if I get any questions in the chat. Let's see. American Annie would explain why he didn't run, although his son had passed away. Yeah, I like your dose of vitamin B12. I'm sure he needed a lot more than B12, but that's true. Let's see. Zach says he was chosen to run because he wasn't mentally deficient enough to be the brainless puppet. Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. Okay, good. I think pretty well caught up. I appreciate the fact we always have such a lively chat. So, all right. Well, that's going to be my show for today. I'm going to wind it up here. I have a lot of news that I want to talk about later on in the week, certain things that I'm working on, especially some more stories on Letitia James. I cannot wait till she has her quote unquote day in court. And I look forward to the time that Donald Trump hopefully will be able to sit behind her in a court of law when she's having her trial. But I'm not holding my breath for that, but we'll see exactly how that goes. I appreciate everybody joining me today, and thanks for the lively conversation. Always like to say, keep that mind free. Never give up, my friends. Till next time, I am J.R. Dukes.